During the 1st century BC, through the 2nd century AD, Rome was not only the capital of the greatest known empire, it was the beating heart of the ancient world. Cosmopolitan, overcrowded, and technically advanced, it drew merchants, soldiers, artists, slaves, philosophers, and opportunists from every corner of the Mediterranean. Sources like Strabo and Dionysius of Halicarnassus describe a vibrant city packed with monumental buildings and bustling markets, with a population that may have surpassed 1 million at the height of the Pax Romana. But behind the triumphal arches and public baths, there was another Rome, noisy, dirty, unequal, a place where living could be a privilege and often a punishment. Today you'll discover what it was like to live in Rome during its golden age. Rome grew faster than it could organize itself. Every decade, more people arrived, peasants seeking bread, veterans hoping for rewards, immigrants dreaming of citizenship. The result was overcrowding, chaos, and a housing crisis unlike anything the ancient world had seen. By the 2nd century AD, according to the Regio Urbis and writers like Suetonius, the city might have held up to 1 million inhabitants. That number didn't mean comfort, it meant improvisation, endless construction, and constant repairs to keep the city functioning. Most people were crammed into insulae, multi-story blocks, built of brick and cheap concrete. From a distance they looked imposing, but inside they were traps. The architect Vitruvius, in his treatise on architecture, warned of their risks: unstable, quick to catch fire, liable to collapse without warning. In AD 64, the Great Fire under Nero exposed just how fragile they were, as whole streets turned to ash in hours. Fires were frequent and devastating, and the sound of collapsing walls was a part of Roman urban life. Each insulae was carved into tiny units, rooms without windows, without latrines, and almost never with running water. Residents often relied on public fountains or cisterns, and waste had to be carried outside, or, in less disciplined households, thrown directly onto the streets below. The lower floors, more expensive, housed families with some means. The upper floors, cheaper, required climbing narrow, hazardous stairs, and offered little more than stifling heat in summer and damp cold in winter. Tenants often rented by the month, and evictions were common. A single candle spark could spell disaster for an entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, the elite lived in another universe. The domus, single-family houses with interior courtyards, gardens, and colonnades, offered comfort, space, and privacy. With large dining rooms, libraries, frescoed salons, and even private baths, they embodied the social abyss, separating common citizens from aristocrats. These houses often displayed wealth through elaborate mosaics, colorful wall paintings, and imported marble columns, a daily reminder of status and power. Even so, these mansions had to yield to Rome's tight topography. Hills, alleys, and noisy neighborhoods put limits on urban luxury. Many aristocrats preferred suburban villas, far from the clamor, with views of the countryside and the scent of quiet. In these villas, surrounded by orchards, vineyards, and water features, they could escape the chaos of the capital. That urban inequality shaped daily life. One neighbor might live among marble columns while, a few meters away, another slept under a wooden roof, ready to cave in. Rome was a city where physical proximity concealed vast social distances. And amid it all, there was one place where rich and poor stood side by side, towels in hand and sweat on their faces: the public baths. The first large bath complexes appeared in the 1st century BC, like Agrippa's, which introduced organized bathing to the city on a monumental scale. Then came true cathedrals of bathing, the baths of Trajan, Caracalla, and Diocletian, marble monuments with giant columns, vaulted ceilings, and mosaics, telling mythological stories, impressed both citizens and foreigners. Most impressive of all, they were open to the public. Admission was cheap or even free, funded by emperors or patrons in search of prestige and popularity. The bath followed a near-choreographed route. First the body was rubbed with perfumed oil, then scraped clean with a curved blade called a strigil to remove sweat and grime. After that came the rooms, the warm tepidarium, the searing caldarium, and finally the frigidarium for an icy shock. There were also dry steam rooms, laconicum, libraries, exercise areas, lecture halls, and gardens for rest. A visit to the baths could last hours, blurring the line between hygiene, leisure, and civic engagement. The wealthy arrived with slaves to carry towels, prepare oils, and adjust water temperature. The poor did everything themselves, yet still enjoyed the same facilities. Once Emperor Hadrian saw an elderly veteran struggling to wash, and in an unexpected gesture, assigned him one of his own slaves, emperor and common soldier, united by the bath. Such stories illustrate the social leveling power of bathing culture. The baths were also a stage for business, gossip, and conspiracy. Deals were closed there, rumors spread in hopes of reaching the right ears, and friendships or rivalries were cemented in the humid air. Early on, bathing was mixed. Hadrian later banned the practice, separating the sexes for the sake of decorum. By the 2nd century, Rome boasted more than 800 public baths of all sizes, a sign of how much bodily care and the appearance of civilization formed part of the Roman soul. Keeping clothing clean outside the bath was another matter, and here enters one of the city's strangest and most lucrative industries. To dress well was mandatory for any Roman who wanted to be taken seriously. Spotless togas, white tunics, unstained cloaks, appearance signaled status, but with dusty streets, constant sweat, and no washing machines, keeping garments clean was a real feat. Clothing was not disposable, so restoring garments was as important as cleaning them. Enter a vital, and frankly repellent profession, the fuller, Rome's launderer. Fullers didn't just clean clothes, they restored a garment's dignity. Their methods, though, make modern noses curl. The main ingredient was urine. Yes, urine, rich in ammonia, a powerful alkaline agent ideal for lifting grease, dirt, and odors from fabric. The city placed public jars for urination at strategic points. Professionals or enterprising collectors gathered the contents. Legal and profitable, in the fullernicae, fullers' workshops, urine was mixed with water and poured into large stone vats. Workers climbed in and stomped the cloth with their feet in a long, rhythmic, absolutely essential process. The sound of stamping and the acrid smell of ammonia were familiar markers of Roman neighborhoods. Pliny the Elder describes these practices in his Natural History, and inscriptions in Pompeii preserve the names and services of local fullers. It was a respected trade, despite the stench. No one profited more from it than Emperor Vespasian, who instituted the vectigal urinae, a tax on urine. Those who collected from public jars paid tribute. When his son Titus mocked the measure, Vespasian lifted a coin to his nose and said, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't stink. Main streets were paved with large blocks of volcanic basalt, carefully graded for drainage, with raised curbs and defined sidewalks for pedestrians. These wide, durable arteries were Rome's pride, part of the great road network that tied the empire together. One could leave the capital and travel to the empire's distant frontiers without ever stepping off a Roman road. Such was the precision and endurance of Roman engineering. Inside the city, however, the experience was very different. As entire neighborhoods grew without careful planning, urban streets became a chaotic maze. Narrow lanes twisted unpredictably, sharp turns led into dead ends, and some passages were so tight that even a cart could barely squeeze through. The uneven, hilly terrain forced architects and residents alike to improvise with stairways, ramps, bridges, and makeshift tunnels that linked one quarter to another. Rome was not designed in a single plan. It grew organically with centuries of layering that produced both marvels and disorder. By day, the noise was overwhelming. Juvenal, in his satires, describes the constant racket that filled the air, squealing wheels scraping against stone, hammer blows from workshops, shouting vendors hawking their goods, and herds of animals being driven through crowded streets. Cicero himself complained of the difficulty of sleeping in Rome because of the endless sounds of the city, and his frustration was shared by many. To ease the chaos, Julius Caesar banned daytime cart traffic, but this simply moved the problem to night. As wagons rumbled through darkened streets, the iron rims of their wheels striking the basalt, whole insulae shook with the noise. For those in the upper floors of tenements, rest was almost impossible. The city never truly slept. The streets themselves deteriorated quickly under constant strain. Traffic shattered paving stones, creating dangerous potholes for pedestrians, carts and animals. Heavy rains turned alleys into mud traps, while sewage and garbage spilled into open spaces. Raised stepping stones, still visible in Pompeii, allowed pedestrians to cross flooded or filthy roads without soiling their clothing, functioning like primitive crosswalks. Even amid the disorder, there was a degree of organization. The Lex Julia Municipalis, issued under Augustus, attempted to regulate urban life, defining everything from the minimum width of streets to the types of buildings permitted in each district. Some street corners even displayed mosaics or painted signs indicating neighborhoods, trade guilds, or building functions, offering a rudimentary form of zoning and wayfinding. What truly sustained the city, however, was not its laws or its armies but its water. Beneath the seemingly chaotic streets lay one of the most advanced sanitation systems of the ancient world, the Cloaca Maxima. First begun in the regal period of the 6th century BC, was initially little more than an open channel built to drain the marshes of the Forum. Over centuries it grew into an extensive underground tunnel network. By the imperial period, it linked together public latrines, drainage channels and even bathhouses, carrying waste away to the Tiber River. Its vaults, built of stone and concrete, were so sturdy that parts of it still function today. If the sewers were the exit, the aqueducts were the entrance, and in this regard Rome truly surpassed itself. These monumental works carried clean water from distant springs and mountain sources, sometimes more than 60 kilometers away, using nothing more than gravity and extraordinary engineering precision. The Aqua Claudia, begun under Caligula and completed by Claudius, and later maintained under Nero, remains a spectacular example. It crossed valleys and hills on towering arcades, the gradient so finely calculated that the water descended at just the right pace to flow steadily for miles. This water fed public fountains, bathhouses, latrines, and in some cases, private homes. Wealthy families with influence and money could afford to install lead pipes, called fistula plumbae, that carried water directly into their domus. For the vast majority, however, access came from public fountains, cisterns, and reservoirs strategically placed across the city. And when the time came to use the toilet, privacy was the one luxury no one enjoyed. Public latrines were large communal chambers lined with rows of stone seats, arranged side by side without partitions. Beneath the benches, running water carried waste away, while another stream at the front served for rinsing the sponge stick or tarsorium, which took the place of toilet paper. The same sponge was often shared among users, dipped in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. Functional though it was, the experience must have been uncomfortable and unhygienic. Despite the brilliance of this infrastructure, problems persisted. Open drains still ran through poorer districts, fountains could become contaminated, and the pervasive stench of sewage was a part of everyday life. Galen, the famous Greek physician practicing in Rome, wrote of the dangers posed by foul air, stagnant water, and the miasmas rising from narrow, damp alleyways. Yet even with these risks, Rome's system allowed something truly remarkable, a vast metropolis of perhaps 1 million people to function and endure for centuries. No other ancient city came close. If water sustained Rome's body, spectacle sustained its soul. Life in Rome was hard, but entertainment was constant and for many indispensable. Spectacle provided relief from toil and poverty, but it was also a powerful political tool. As Juvenal famously put it, panem et circenses, bread and circuses, summed up the formula by which emperors and magistrates maintained the loyalty of the masses. No monument expressed this better than the Colosseum, the Flavian amphitheater, inaugurated by Titus in AD 80, was more than just a stadium. It was an icon of imperial power and the grandeur of Roman engineering. With a capacity for nearly 80,000 spectators, its travertine arches and tiered seating welcomed vast crowds eager for blood, sweat, and spectacle. Within its walls unfolded the games that defined the Roman imagination: gladiatorial combats, exotic animal hunts known as venationes, staged executions of criminals, and even mock naval battles called naumachia, in which the arena floor was flooded to stage miniature sea fights. Most astonishing of all, admission was free. Emperors and magistrates bore the costs, seeing in the games an opportunity to display generosity, win favor, and reinforce their authority. The sponsor of a grand spectacle could bask in public gratitude and secure political advantage, but Rome did not live on gladiators alone. The city also hosted great stone theaters, such as those of Pompeius, Marcellus, and Balbus, modeled on Greek designs, with semicircular seating and finely tuned acoustics. These theaters presented plays that ranged from noble tragedies to coarse comedies. Some performances carried subtle political critiques, others offered sheer diversion. In their rows, the people laughed, shouted, and sometimes jeered, engaging directly with the art of performance. And then there was the Circus Maximus, the grandest arena of them all, dedicated to chariot racing. This vast stadium, capable of holding up to 150,000 spectators, was the stage for the most dangerous and thrilling sport of antiquity. The races pitting the great factions, most famously the Blues and the Greens, stirred emotions to the point of frenzy. Bets were placed, rivalries exploded, and the pounding of hooves around the spina, the central barrier, kept crowds at the edge of their seats. Fatal crashes, known as naufragia, were common, and drivers risked their lives in every turn of the track. Fans sometimes fought violently in the stands, and riots could spill into the streets. On show days, the city's rhythm changed completely. Market stalls shut down, schools closed, workshops went silent, and all attention shifted to the roar of the crowds, the music of trumpets, and the excitement of spectacle. For a few hours, Rome's endless hardships gave way to exhilaration, and the people were united in their hunger for glory, speed, and blood. The empire offered its greatest product: distraction. While the crowds roared in the amphitheater or at the races, another part of society lived almost invisible in the background, with little access to laughter and everything to lose: children. In Rome, childhood was short and fragile, and formal schooling was a privilege that only a minority could access. There was no organized system of public education funded by the state. What a child learned depended on the resources of the family, and even more decisively, on whether the child was born male or female. The earliest years of learning usually took place at home. The father, as pater familias, held the role of moral and intellectual guide. He was expected to teach his sons the basics of literacy and numeracy, but above all, he shaped them into Roman citizens, obedient, disciplined, brave, and prepared to serve the family and the state. Daughters, by contrast, learned from their mothers, who trained them to weave, sew, manage servants, and prepare for an early marriage, often arranged before they reached adulthood. For girls, education was not aimed at civic life, but at ensuring the survival and honor of the household. Wealthier families could afford more. They often employed private tutors, Many of them educated Greek slaves to broaden their children's instruction. The pedagogus, more than a tutor, was a constant presence. He walked with children to their lessons, ensured they behaved properly in public, and supervised their studies. Lessons themselves did not take place in specialized buildings, but in a variety of spaces, shaded porticos, rented rooms, or even open-air courtyards. Regardless of location, discipline was strict, and corporal punishment was widely accepted as part of the learning process. Education advanced through 3 recognized stages. In the ludus literalis, children learned to form letters, read simple texts, and perform elementary arithmetic. Wax tablets and styluses were common tools. Those who advanced continued to study under a grammaticus, who introduced them to the literary heritage of Greece and Rome, Homer's epics, Virgil's Aeneid, the tragedies of Euripides, and the moral lessons embedded in these works. Finally, the highest level, reserved for the privileged few, was training under the rhetor. Here young men learned rhetoric, the art of persuasion, argument, and oratory, skills indispensable for a career in politics, law, or public administration. Girls, however, seldom progressed beyond the first stage. Since they were excluded from political life, the curriculum of grammar and rhetoric was considered unnecessary for them. Still, in some elite households, daughters could be well educated, with a few even acquiring knowledge of philosophy, literature, or poetry. Epigraphic evidence and surviving texts suggest that educated women, while rare, were admired for their refinement, even if they were exceptions to the rule. Material remains reveal glimpses of a Roman child's world. Archaeologists have uncovered ivory dolls with articulated limbs, miniature chariots, dice, spinning tops, and marbles. These finds show that play existed, though it was limited and quickly overshadowed by adult responsibilities. By the age of 12, boys might be apprenticed to a trade, enrolled in military training, or expected to begin preparing for civic duties. Girls of the same age were often engaged or already married, beginning their adult lives before adolescence had truly ended. Yet childhood was overshadowed by harsh realities. Infant and child mortality rates were devastatingly high. Epidemics, malnutrition, domestic accidents, and infectious diseases meant that many families lost children early. This precariousness influenced attitudes toward parenthood. Some historians argue that Romans often maintained a certain emotional distance from their youngest children until survival seemed likely, though literary sources also record deep parental grief. Even within these limits, childhood in Rome could take unexpected turns. Girls destined for religious service, such as the Vestal Virgins, found themselves stepping outside traditional family paths into positions of rare prestige and influence. In ancient Rome, to be born a woman meant entering a world shaped almost entirely by rules and expectations defined by men. Women could not hold office, vote in assemblies, or represent themselves in court. They were, from birth until death, legally bound to male authority, first their fathers, then their husbands, and sometimes even their own sons if they became widows. But Roman women's lives were not all identical. Their daily experiences were determined by 3 crucial factors: their social status, their wealth, and the man who held authority over them. A woman of the aristocracy, a matrona, enjoyed a life of relative comfort. She presided over the household, commanded slaves, organized banquets, and managed domestic finances. Many were deeply involved in religious rituals and could gain influence indirectly through their roles as wives and mothers of powerful men. Some, like Livia, wife of Augustus, or Agrippina, mother of Nero, wielded considerable political power behind the scenes, shaping imperial decisions through counsel and manipulation. By contrast, poor women had no such shield. They labored constantly, selling goods in markets, assisting in childbirth as midwives, washing clothes in fulleries, or working in workshops and fields. Their contribution to family survival was indispensable, but their personal freedom was limited, and their days were defined by exhaustion. Religion offered some women unique opportunities. The most honored priestesses were the Vestal virgins, chosen as children to serve Vesta, goddess of the hearth. For 30 years, they lived apart from their families, sworn to chastity, tending the sacred flame that symbolized Rome's eternal life. In return, they received privileges that ordinary women could never dream of: legal independence, seats of honor at public games, and the right to pardon prisoners. Yet their position was precarious. Any violation of their vow of virginity was punished by a grim fate: burial alive within the city walls. On the margins of society existed women whose lives were marked by stigma, but who nonetheless played a visible role in the urban economy. Registered prostitutes, or meretrices, worked in lupernaria brothels or in designated districts. Some were enslaved, forced into the trade by owners, while others were free women who sought autonomy outside family control, often at the price of social respectability. Their presence was tolerated, regulated, and even taxed, forming part of the city's social fabric. Despite restrictions, history preserves examples of women who carved out influence. Julia Domna, wife of Septimius Severus, gathered philosophers and writers at her court. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi brothers, became a model of republican virtue, remembered for her devotion to her son's education. Countless other women, whose names are lost, lived lives of quiet endurance, negotiating between legal constraints and personal necessity. Above all, Roman women were seen as the moral backbone of the household, guardians of tradition, and the invisible glue that held family life together. Within that domestic setting, religion was ever present. The daily rhythms of piety revolved around the Lares and Penates, the guardian deities of hearth and home, whose small household shrines were the focal point of family devotion. These rites, conducted within the walls of the Domus, reflected the Roman conviction that religion was not simply a matter of personal faith, but a duty interwoven with civic life, family order, and the continuity of the state itself. Small shrines, known as Lararia, stood at the heart of every Roman household, often placed near the kitchen or close to the entrance, so that family members would see them each day. These were modest altars, decorated with small statues or painted images of protective spirits, where the paterfamilias performed regular rituals. He would pour libations of wine, burn incense, or leave offerings of bread, fruit, and cakes, to ensure the protection of the household gods, the prosperity of the pantry, and the well-being of everyone living under the roof. These ceremonies were not optional. To neglect a rite, forget an offering, or offend a spirit could mean angering the divine guardians, with misfortune falling on the entire family. Beyond the domestic sphere, religion took on a much grander and more public character. Rome's skyline was dominated by temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Juno, Minerva, and countless others, each a reminder of the city's dependence on divine favor. The Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, stood as the symbolic heart of Rome, the place where the might of the gods and the authority of the state met. Religious festivals filled the calendar, blending ritual with spectacle, sacrifices, processions, games, and theatrical performances, all dedicated to the gods who Romans believed held the city's destiny in their hands. Under Augustus, a new religious dimension emerged that changed the political landscape forever: the imperial cult. After Julius Caesar's death and his official deification, Augustus himself was honored as divus, following his own passing. From that point onward, emperors could be elevated into the ranks of the gods, with temples, altars, and priesthoods established in their names. This practice was more than mere piety. It was political theater, binding loyalty to the emperor with reverence for the divine. Worship of the imperial family became propaganda carved in stone and performed in ritual, a constant reminder of Rome's unity under one ruler. But while gods and rituals framed the sacred world, daily life in Rome was shaped just as profoundly by earthly authority, the law, politics, and the absolute power of the family patriarch. Roman citizenship itself was one of the most valued possessions a man could hold. It was a mark of identity, privilege, and belonging, but it also came with obligations that few could escape. At first, citizenship was rare and limited to free men born in Rome or belonging to favored lineages. As Rome expanded, the demand for broader rights grew. In the 2nd century BC, the Gracchi brothers tried to extend citizenship to Italy's allies, sparking conflict and debate. Only centuries later, with the Edict of Caracalla in AD 212, did citizenship finally extend to nearly all free men across the empire, transforming what had once been a local privilege into a universal bond that tied millions of people to Rome. Citizenship granted the right to vote in assemblies, enroll in the census, serve in the legions, and appeal to Roman courts. But rights were paired with responsibilities, paying taxes, enduring military service, and obeying Rome's elaborate laws. In reality, the poorest citizens rarely exercised political influence, voting assemblies were unwieldy, and true power was monopolized by the senatorial elite and wealthy aristocracy. They filled the Senate, dominated the magistracies, and controlled imperial administration. The Republic presented itself as participatory, but in practice, Rome was an oligarchy, with a popular facade that masked the dominance of a few families. The structure of the Roman household mirrored this imbalance. Within the domus, the paterfamilias wielded authority every bit as sweeping as the emperor's. Legally, he had absolute power over all members of the household, his wife, children, grandchildren, slaves, and even dependent relatives. He decided on marriages, approved or denied business deals, determined inheritances, and administered punishments. In early law, he even held the power to expose an unwanted newborn, sell his children into slavery, or sentence them to death. Though many of these rights softened over time, especially under the empire, the ideal of paternal authority remained deeply ingrained. He was the guardian of family honor and the enforcer of discipline, embodying the Roman values of hierarchy, order, and control. This domestic order reflected the broader ideals of the Roman state. Just as soldiers obeyed their commanders, so too children were expected to obey their fathers. Just as the emperor demanded loyalty from his subjects, so too the paterfamilias required respect and obedience within the home. The Mus Manuorum, the unwritten code of ancestral tradition, reinforced this framework. It dictated that every Roman should accept his or her role, whether as father, mother, son, daughter, or slave, and uphold the customs handed down from the ancestors. Stability depended on each person respecting their place in the hierarchy, in both household and empire. To live in Rome during its golden age was to experience this constant paradox. On one hand, the city represented the pinnacle of ancient achievement, aqueducts that carried pure water across mountains and valleys for dozens of kilometers, monumental baths that welcomed rich and poor alike, written laws that provided some measure of order, and temples and theaters that proclaimed the grandeur of Roman culture. It was a city where philosophers debated, poets wrote epics, engineers reshaped landscapes, and artists created works that would influence the West for centuries. Yet at the same time, Rome was a place of suffocating overcrowding and inequality. The vast majority lived in cramped, unstable insulae that could collapse or burn at any moment. Families slept in stifling, windowless rooms, shared toilets with strangers, and endured constant noise and stench. For all its aqueducts and laws, Rome still reeked of sewage, resounded with the chaos of traffic and shouting vendors, and was shaken by spectacles of bloodshed in which thousands cheered as men and animals fought to the death. It was a city that produced timeless literature and art, but also normalized the rejection of unwanted infants, the enslavement of millions, and the casual brutality of public executions. Knowing all this, let me ask you, would you have the courage to live in Rome 2,000 years ago? Tell me in the comments. We love reading your answers. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content like this, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who loves history, and may Mars guide you in battle.